Take your time with it, Eli. I'm in no hurry to be alone in this house. That was the first thing Helen Garrett said to me. Not hello. Not thank you for coming, just that. Standing in the open door of the lake house with one hand resting on the frame, like she'd been holding it there a while. I didn't know what to say back. So I said the thing carpenters say. I told her I'd need to walk the dock first before I could give her a real number. She nodded. She stepped aside to let me look. My name is Eli Brandt. I'm 37. I build small boats and fix old houses, and I'm not famous for either, which is fine by me. The boats are wooden. Rowboats, a few sailing dinghies, the kind of thing nobody needs anymore and a small number of people still want. The houses pay the rent between the boats. I learned all of it from a man named Hal Garrett, who happened to be Helen's husband. He died last winter, back in February, in the kind of cold where the lake freezes thick enough to walk on and the wind comes off it like it has something to prove. I got the call on a Tuesday. I remember because I was sanding a transom, and I never finished that boat. It's still in my shop with one side smooth and one side rough, and I can't make myself touch it. Hal taught me how to read grain, how to listen to a plank before you cut it, how to know when a joint is good not by looking at it, but by the small, clean sound it makes when it seats. He was 61 when I met him and I was 20. He never once raised his voice at me. He just kept showing me the same thing until my hands learned it. He'd talk about this place, the lake house. Said he and Helen would retire here proper one day, sit on the dock, watch the water do nothing. He didn't get to. So when Helen called and asked if I'd come look at the dock and the old boathouse, both of them rotting out by the water, I said yes before she finished the sentence. I'd have said yes if she'd asked me to dig a hole and fill it back in. The dock was bad. I could see that before I got close. The decking had gone soft and gray, and 3 of the boards near the far end had cracked through. Somebody had laid a sheet of plywood over the worst spot, the way you do when you mean to fix it later, and later keeps not coming. I crouched and pressed my thumb into one of the joists. It gave. Wet all the way through. That bad? Helen asked. She'd followed me out. She was standing a few feet back, arms folded, not crowding me. It's bad, I said. I didn't soften it. Hal taught me that too. You don't lie to people about their own wood. These joists are done, half the decking. The pilings I'd have to check underwater, but if the top went, the bottom's probably not happy either. I waited for her to flinch. People usually flinch when you tell them how much of a thing is gone. She didn't. Hal kept meaning to do it himself, she said. She looked out at the water instead of at me. Every spring he'd say, "This is the summer." Then summer would come and he'd build something else instead. A birdhouse, a chair nobody sat in. A small breath that wasn't quite a laugh. He was very good at fixing everything except the things at home. I didn't know what to do with that. So I stood up and looked where she was looking. The lake was flat and silver. There was a heron standing in the shallows down the shoreline, dead still, the way they get when they're hunting. The light was doing that late afternoon thing where everything goes gold, and a little sad. I walked the rest of the dock slow, testing each board with my weight before I trusted it. A few held. Most didn't, not really, they just hadn't given up yet. I knelt at the far end and looked through a gap into the dark water moving against the pilings, and I could already see the shape of the whole job laid out in my head. Every board I'd pull, every one I'd cut new. That's a thing I can do that I can't explain. I look at a broken thing and I see it finished. Helen watched me do it and didn't ask what I was seeing. She just waited, which most people can't. I can fix it, I said finally. All of it. The dock and the boathouse both. It's a summer of work though, maybe more. I'm not going to pretend it's quick. Good, she said. I looked at her. I mean it. She caught my look and held it, steady, not embarrassed. Take your time, I told you. There's nothing in that house that needs me, and there's nothing waiting for me out of it. If you tell me this takes until October, I'll be glad of the noise. Helen Garrett was 53. I knew that the way you know things about the people your mentor loved without ever being told directly. She had gray coming in at her temples and she hadn't dyed it out, and there was something in the way she stood that made you understand she'd decided a long time ago not to apologize for taking up space. She wasn't fragile. I want to be clear about that, because people hear widow and they picture something breakable, and that was not Helen. She was just alone. There's a difference. You can be the strongest person in the room and still come home to a house that's too quiet. And you can hear that quiet in how careful a person is with their words, like they've gotten used to talking only to themselves, and they're out of practice making it land for someone else. I knew that quiet. I'd been living in it for a year. I'll need to get under the dock, I said. Tomorrow, if the weather holds. I'll bring a wetsuit and check the pilings. There's coffee in the morning, she said, whatever time you come. It wasn't an offer that needed an answer. So I gave it a nod the way Hal would have, and I started back up toward my truck to write up the numbers. That's when I saw the workshop. It was a separate building, set back from the house in the trees, with the doors open. I shouldn't have looked. But the doors were open, and I'm a man who notices a workshop the way other men notice a parked car they used to own. Helen saw me see it. "You can go in," she said. "He'd have wanted you to. You more than anyone." I didn't move for a second. Then I did. It smelled like him. That was the thing that got me. Sawdust and linseed oil and the particular cheap pipe tobacco he kept around, even after his doctor told him to quit, which he half did, which meant the smell never fully left. I stood in the doorway, and it was like the year hadn't happened. Like Hal was just out at the truck for something and would be back to tell me I was holding the chisel wrong. His bench was exactly how he'd have left it. Tools on the wall in the order he liked them, traced in pencil so he'd know if one went missing. A project clamped down, half done. He was always leaving things half done. I used to give him grief about it. Now I understood it was just a man who always believed he had more time. And there, sitting on the bench by itself, like it had been set out, was his marking gauge. I picked it up before I thought about it. If you don't know the tool, it's a small thing. A worn brass and rosewood hand tool you use to scribe a line parallel to an edge, so you know where to cut. This one was old. The rosewood had gone dark and smooth from his hands, decades of his hands, and the brass had that soft glow brass gets when somebody's touched it 10,000 times. There was a nick in the fence where he dropped it once and sworn for a full minute. I was there for that. I remembered the swearing. He'd marked 100 boats with this. He'd marked the first boat I ever built, standing over my shoulder, scribing the line himself because I was too nervous to do it. That was his father's, Helen said. She was in the doorway now. I hadn't heard her come up. And his grandfather's before that, he claimed, though I never knew if that was true or one of his stories. She looked at it in my hand. "He'd want you to have it. Not now. Don't take it now. It'll feel wrong. But you should know it's yours when the time's right." I set it back down on the bench, carefully. Like it might break, which it wouldn't. Brass and rosewood don't break, but you handle the dead things like they might. "Thank you," I said. It came out rougher than I meant. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "I'm trading it for a summer of you under my dock in a wetsuit. I think I'm getting the better deal." And there it was. The first time she made me almost smile. I felt it happen, and I think she saw it, and neither of us said anything about it, which was the right thing to do. I wrote up the numbers at my truck, fair numbers. I knocked off more than I should have and called it a friend's rate, and she didn't argue, which told me she knew exactly what I'd done and was letting me do it. Driving home, I had the marking gauge in my head and a word in my chest that wouldn't leave. Boring. That was the word. The one I'd been carrying around for a year and a half, longer than the grief almost. It belonged to a woman named Claire, who I'd been with for 3 years and almost married. She left in a way that was very quiet and very polite. No scandal, no shouting. Just a slow leaking out of a thing until one day she sat across from me at our own kitchen table and told me the truth. She said I was steady. She said it like an accusation. She said I was the most reliable she'd ever met, and that she'd realized somewhere along the way that reliable and boring were the same thing wearing different shirts. She said she wanted a life that surprised her, and I never surprised her, and she was sorry, and she was leaving. Boring. I've turned it over 1,000 times. The thing about a word like that is it's hard to fight, because there's no evidence to bring against it. You can't prove you're interesting. The harder you try, the more you prove her point, so you just carry it. You let it sit in the back of your throat every time you do something quiet and careful and good, which for me is most of what I do, because quiet and careful and good is the only way I know how to build a thing that lasts. I build boats nobody needs. I fix houses one joint at a time. I learned it all from a dead man, and I keep his tools clean. Maybe she was right. Maybe that's a boring life. I got home to my own quiet house and stood in my own shop in front of the boat with one smooth side and one rough side, and I didn't touch it, like always. But I thought about the lake. I thought about the heron standing dead still in the gold light, and a dock that was rotten all the way through, and a woman who'd told me to take my time because she was in no hurry to be alone. I'd taken jobs for money before. Plenty of them. This wasn't that. I'd said yes to this one before I knew the number, before I saw the rot, before I knew anything except that it was Hal's place and Helen had called. I told myself it was for him, that I owed him this, the dock he never finished, the summer he never got, and that was true. That was most of it. But there was a smaller thing underneath, and I noticed it the way you notice a sound in a house at night, faint and impossible to locate. It was that for the first time in a long time somebody had looked at the way I crouched on a rotten dock and pressed my thumb into a wet joist and told the truth about it without flinching, and she hadn't seen boring. She'd just watched. The whole time I worked, she'd watched my hands. She hadn't said anything about it. Helen, I'd learn, almost never said the important things straight out, but I'd felt her watching the way you feel sun on the back of your neck, and there'd been something in it that wasn't pity, and wasn't grief, and wasn't anything I had a name for yet. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay there with the word boring on one side of me and the lake house on the other, and somewhere in the dark the two of them started arguing, and I didn't know which one was going to win. What I did know was that in the morning I was going to put on a wetsuit and go under that dock and start the longest, slowest, most careful job I'd taken in years. A whole summer of it. Just me in the water, and a house too quiet for one person, and a woman who'd be standing on the shore with coffee watching. I didn't know yet how much that summer was going to cost me, or what it was going to give back. I just knew the dock was rotten and the boathouse was worse, and that somewhere in the trees there was a brass marking gauge with a nick in the fence, waiting. The way Hal had waited too long for everything, the way I'd been waiting too, for what I couldn't have told you. The next morning the water was cold enough to take my breath, and Helen was on the shore with 2 cups, and that was when the real work began. The pilings were better than the top, which is how it usually goes. The water punishes wood from above, sun and rain and ice working the decking down to gray pulp, while the part that lives in the cold dark just gets slow and stubborn. I came up out of the lake that first morning with my hands gone numb and told Ellen the bottom would hold. She handed me a cup and a towel she'd had ready, and she didn't say anything, and that was the start of how we worked. It went like this for weeks. I'd get there early. The lake would be doing whatever the lake did, flat some mornings, chopped up gray on others. Helen would already be awake. I never once beat her to it. There'd be coffee and she'd carry her own cup out to the shore and find a spot to sit, and she'd watch a while before she went back to whatever a person does alone in a house all day. She never hovered. She never asked me how it was going in that way. People ask when they want reassurance. She just looked, the way she'd looked the first day, like the work itself was worth watching. Tearing out a dock is ugly before it's anything. You take the bad part or you can build the good. I spent the better part of the first 2 weeks just pulling, cracked planks as stacked joists I cut out in sections because they were too rotten to pull whole. The plywood somebody had laid over the soft spot came up wet and black underneath, and I held it out to her without a word, and she made a face that told me she understood exactly what kind of corner had been cut and exactly who'd cut it. He'd have hated that I let it get this far, she said. He'd have hated worse that he was the one who put the plywood down, I said. That got the breath out of her that wasn't quite a laugh. I was starting to recognize it. Helen didn't laugh easy, but she had that small exhale, almost nothing, that meant a thing had landed. We started taking lunch on the dock once there was enough of it to sit on. That came around the 3rd week, when I'd got new joists in across the near half and laid temporary boards over them so a person could walk out without going in the water. She'd come out, noon, water. She'd come out around noon with 2 plates, nothing fancy, sandwiches mostly, and a thermos. We'd sit with our feet hanging over the new fring and the old rot still hanging on past where I'd gotten to, and we'd eat, and we'd talk, or we wouldn't, and both were fine. She asked me about the boats one of those afternoons. I don't talk about the boats much. People ask to be polite and their eyes go somewhere else by the second sentence, so I learned to keep it short. But Helen asked the way she did everything, like she actually wanted the answer and had time for it, and I found myself telling her more than I meant to. About the wood. How you can't fight grain, you have to read it and go where it wants. How a hull is just a long argument between a flat board and a curve, and your whole job is to make the board agree to bend without breaking. How a good boat is quiet in the water. How a bad one tells on you every time it moves. I talked longer than I had in months. I noticed it the way you notice you've been walking downhill, only by how easy it's been. Hal said you were the best he'd taught, she said when I finally ran out. He said you had hands that listened. I looked at the water. He never said that to me. He wouldn't have. He didn't want it going to your head. She wrapped her hands around her cup. He said it to me, though. More than once, he said the others learn to make things. You learn to make them last. I didn't have anywhere to put that, so I put it nowhere, and we sat, and after a while she took the plates back up to the house. That was the thing about working there. It got into a rhythm I hadn't had in a long time, maybe ever. 2 careful people, neither of us in a hurry. She'd hand me what I needed before I asked sometimes, having watched long enough to learn the order of things. I'd notice when her cup was empty and fill it from the thermos without making a thing of it. We moved around each other on that shore like two people who'd been doing it for years, and it had been weeks. Then Dana called, and the other kind of life came in over the phone. Dana's my sister, younger by 6 years, and we came out of the same house as different species. Where I go quiet, she goes loud. Where I keep a thing for years, she's on to the next one by spring. She falls in love the way other people catch colds, all at once and with a lot of noise, and she falls out of it the same way. I love her. I want to say that first, because what comes next sounds like I don't, and I do. She called while I was up to my elbows in the boathouse, and I took it because she'd called twice, and Dana calling twice means something's on fire. It was a breakup. Of course it was a breakup. This one was named Trevor, and I'd never met Trevor, and now I never would, and from the way she was crying I gathered Trevor was either the love of her life or the worst thing that had ever happened to her, and with Dana those were frequently the same man. I stood in the half-gutted boathouse and let her talk. That's the job, mostly. She doesn't want answers. She wants a wall to throw it against that throws a little back. So I gave her that. He'd done something with his ex, or said something, or hadn't said something. And there'd been a scene, a real one. The kind with a restaurant and raised voices and a story she'd be telling for a year. There's always a scene with Dana. The love is real, but it can't seem to happen unless somebody's watching. "And what are you even doing?" she said, finally, sniffing, turning it on me the way she does when she's done with herself. "You've gone quiet again. You always go quiet. Where are you?" "Working a lake house, restoring a dock." "All summer, by yourself at a lake?" She said lake like I'd told her I'd joined a monastery. "Ellie, that is the most boring thing I have ever heard. You're 37, you should be living." There it was. The word out of a different mouth, but the same word, boring. It went in the same place it always goes and sat there. I told her I had to get back to it. I told her Trevor was an idiot and she was better off, which is the only line that ever helps and only because it's usually true. She said she loved me, and I was hopeless, and she hung up to go cry to the next person on her list. I stood there a minute with the phone in my hand. "That your sister?" Helen was in the boathouse doorway. I don't know how long. She had a way of being there without arriving. "Dana," I said. "Number, I've lost count." "You don't sound worried." "I'm not. She'll be fine by Thursday and engaged by Christmas." I set the phone down. She thinks this is boring. What I'm doing here, said it like she was reading me a diagnosis. I don't know why I told her that. It came out before I waited. Helen didn't answer right away. She came in and looked at the boathouse, at the old beams I'd braced and the ones I hadn't gotten to, the light coming through the gaps where I'd pulled the rotten siding. "Hal's father built this," she said. "Did you know that?" "No." 1951, by hand. Hal kept a photograph of it, the day it was finished, his father standing right about where you are. She ran a hand along one of the old beams, the good ones, the ones that had held 70 years. Nobody remembers that man's name now but us. He's gone, his name's gone, and the building's still standing because he didn't cut a corner where the water gets in. She looked at me. "Tell me which part of that is boring." I didn't say anything. "Your sister sounds like she's never been quiet long enough to find out what she actually is." It wasn't said cruel. Helen didn't do cruel. Some people need an audience to feel a thing. And then there are people who do the thing whether or not anyone's looking, and never say a word about it, and though they'll say a word about it, and those are the only ones I've ever trusted. She turned back to the beam. Hal was one of those. He never told a soul half of what he did for people. I'd find out years later by accident, from someone he'd helped. He'd just shrug. "He did that to me too," I said. "Loaned me money once when I was starting out, never let me pay it back, never mentioned it again, acted like it never happened." "I know," she said. "I'm the one who told him to." That stopped me. "He wanted to give you more," she said. "I told him you had pride and you'd need to think you'd done it yourself. So he did it quiet." She looked at me, level. "You're the same as him, you know. The same exact way. You'll spend a whole summer making sure a doc outlives you. For a woman you barely know, at a friend's rate that I know is costing you, and you'll never once tell anyone you did it." She let that sit. "That's not boring, Eli. That's the rarest thing I know. Whoever told you otherwise was telling you about themselves." I want to tell you I had something to say to that. I didn't. I stood in the boathouse Hal's father built and I felt that word, the one I'd carried for a year and a half, come a little loose in its setting. Not gone, but loose. Like a fastener somebody'd finally gotten a wrench on after I'd been telling myself it was rusted in for good. If you've never had someone name the part of you that you'd been told was the worthless part, and call it the best part instead, I can't explain what it does. It doesn't feel good, exactly. It feels like being seen, which is a thing that can hurt going in. I went back to work. She went back to the house. But something had changed in the air of that place, and we both knew it, and neither of us touched it, because touching it might have broken it. The thing about doing slow, careful work near someone for weeks is that the closeness sneaks up on you. There's no single moment. It's 1,000 small ones. It's her learning to hand me the right chisel. It's me learning she takes her coffee black until afternoon, and then a little milk. No reason, just her way. It's the two of us reaching for the same board at the same time and her hand landing over mine for half a second, before we both pulled back and got very interested in the lake. That happened, the board. I should tell it straight. I was setting the first of the new decking, the real boards, the ones that would still be there in 50 years, and I needed a second pair of hands to hold the run square while I marked it. She'd been watching, so she just stepped in. No discussion. She put her hands where mine had been, holding the board true. And I reached for what I needed to scribe the line, and without thinking I'd brought it from the workshop that morning. I don't fully remember deciding to, and it was in my hand before I clocked what it was. Hal's marking gauge. She saw it the second I did. I felt her go still across the board from me. The brass and the dark rosewood, the nick in the fence. Her husband's hands had worn that smooth. Her husband's father's before him, if the story was true. You brought it, she said. Quiet. I shouldn't have, I said. I'll put it back. This morning, it was in my hand before I thought. I started to set it down on the new board. No. She didn't hands off the wood, she was holding the board. Use it. He'd want it used. It's been sitting on a bench for a year doing nothing. That's the real waste. She looked at the gauge, then at me, and her voice came out careful, the way it did when she meant a thing more than she was saying. Mark the board, Eli. So I did, with her hands. On one end, and Hal's tool in mine, I scribed a clean line down a board that would outlast all three of us. And there was a held breath over that dock that had nothing to do with the work, and we both let it pass without naming it. I marked it. I cut to the line. The board went down true and quiet, the way a good one does. There, she said. She took her hands back. She held them a second, like they were cold, though it wasn't cold. That's better. A tool wants to be working. So does a person, I said, before I could stop it. She looked at me then, really looked, the way she had that first day on the rotten dock, and for a second neither of us did the thing we'd been doing all summer, which was looking away. The lake was flat. The heron was somewhere down the shore. The new board lay there with Hal's line cut clean through it. Then she stood up off the dock and brushed her hands on her jeans and said the plates wouldn't carry themselves, and went up to the house, and I went back to the boards, and we put the politeness back on between us like a coat you take off and forget you set down. That was the day it got dangerous. Not because anything happened. Because nothing did, and both of us had felt how easily something could have, and a thing you can feel that clearly is a thing that's going to come for you eventually. I drove home that night with Hal's gauge on the seat beside me, and I didn't put it back in the workshop. And I told myself it was because we'd need it tomorrow. The decking went down, board by board, through the back half of summer. The boathouse came back together, the new sign pale against the old gray beams that it held since '51. We found our rhythm again, the easy one, the safe one. Lunches on the dock. Her watching from the shore. The work getting done the way good work does. Slow and sure and without much said. I let myself believe it could just stay like that. Two careful people, a dock, a long gold summer, the danger held off at arm's length where it couldn't do any harm. But you don't get to choose when a summer turns. The weather chooses. And toward the end of August, the radio started talking about a system coming up from the south, the kind that stalls over the lakes and sits, and the man on the station said, batten down what you've got and stay off the water. I looked at the half-finished boathouse and the new dock still missing its last rail, and I figured I had a day, maybe two, to get the loose things tied down before it hit. I was wrong about the storm. I was wrong about how much it would take, and what it would leave behind, and what a person says to another person when the power's out and the rain's coming sideways and there's nowhere left to look but straight at the thing you've both been pretending not to see. I was wrong about the day I thought I had. The storm came early. I'd driven out that morning to tie down the loose lumber and stake a tarp over the open boathouse wall, figuring on a few hours and a clear run home. By noon, the lake had gone the color of an old nickel and the wind was coming off it in shoves. By 2, the rain started, fat and slow at first, then all at once, the way the man on radio said it wouldn't. I got the lumber strapped and the tarp lashed, and I was soaked clean through, and when I came around the house to my truck, the gravel drive was already running like a creek, and the road past it was worse. Helen was on the porch with a towel. "You're not driving that," she said. It wasn't a question. She'd been watching the road longer than I had. "I can make the highway. You can put your truck in the ditch on the county line is what you can do." She held the towel out. "There's a guest room. There's soup. Come inside before you drown standing up. I want to say I argued harder. I didn't. The honest part is I'd already seen the road and known. The rest of it I'd known longer than that. So I went in. The power held for an hour, then it didn't. We were in the kitchen when it went, her at the stove and me at the table with my wet boots drying by the door and a cup going cold in my hands, and the lights stuttered once and quit, and the house got very dark and very quiet except for the rain coming sideways at the windows. She didn't make a thing of it. She found candles in a drawer like she'd found them in the dark before, and a kerosene lamp that had been Hal's, and she set them around the kitchen, and the room came back in that low gold way a room does by flame, and we were two people in a storm and nowhere to be. We'd been easy with each other all summer in the daylight. This was different. The dark does that. It takes away all the places to look. On the dock there was always the water, the heron, the next board. Here there was a table and two candles and her across from me, and the rain. And that was the whole world. For a while we talked about nothing. The way the gutters were holding. Whether the new dock would take it, and I said it would. I'd built it to. She asked, was I sure, and I said a board I cut to a line will hold. It's the corners you skip that find you. And she went quiet at that, the way she did when a thing I'd said had more than one floor to it. Then she set her cup down and looked at the lamp instead of me and said, I almost didn't sell the place, after Hal. I didn't say anything. You learn, with someone like Helen, that the talking comes if you leave the room for it. My sister told me to. Get rid of it, she said. Too many ghosts. Move into town where there's people. She turned the cup a quarter turn on the table. But the ghosts were the only company I had. I wasn't going to go somewhere they couldn't follow. She breathed out, that small exhale. Then the dock started rotting and I thought, well, there's a thing he'd have fixed. There's a thing I can do with my hands instead of just sitting in here being a widow at the window. That's why you called me out. That's why I called you out. Hal's name in the phone. I'd never deleted it. I scrolled to it like I was going to call him, and I called the man he taught instead. She gave a small shake of her head. I sat on that porch the morning you came, and I had no idea what I'd actually hired. I thought I'd bought a summer of noise, somebody else's truck in the drive, so the place wasn't so empty. And you turned out to be quieter than the empty. That landed soft, almost fond. You'd work a whole morning, and I'd have to come check you hadn't left. And somewhere in there I stopped wanting the noise. She stopped. I waited too long to want things, Eli. With Hal the last few years. I knew what I had, and I kept thinking there was time to slow down and have it properly. And then there wasn't. Her voice didn't break, it just went level in the way that cost more than breaking. I'd give a great deal to not make that particular mistake twice. That sat in the room with us. I knew what she'd said and what she hadn't, and I knew she'd left the gap on purpose, and I knew she was waiting to see what I'd do with it. So I told her the truth, because the dark and the lamp and the thing in her voice had got it most of the way out of me already. There was a woman, I said. Before 3 years I thought we were building towards something, and the day she left, she stood in my kitchen and told me what I was. She said I was steady. She said it like a sentence. She said being with me was like watching paint dry, and that she wanted a life that felt like something, and that I was the safest, most boring man she'd ever wasted her good years on. I'd never said it out loud, not the whole of it. I'd carried that word a year and a half like a stone in a coat pocket, and never once said it on a table where another person could see it. And the worst part, I said, is I believed her. I built my whole next life around being right about being dull. I took small jobs. I stopped seeing people. I figured if boring was the truest thing about me, I'd best lean all the way into it and not bother anybody with the rest. Helen was very still across the lamp. And then your sister said it on the phone in the boathouse, she said. The same word. The same word. She was quiet a moment. Then she did a thing I didn't expect. She reached across the table, not far, and put her hand flat on the wood between us, not on me, just near, palm down, an offer with no weight on it. Listen to me, she said. I was married 31 years to a man who made boats and never raised his voice and came home every single night. People called him dull too. His own brother called him a piece of furniture once at a wedding drunk thought it was funny. Her jaw set. That dull man held my hand through 2 miscarriages and never made me feel I'd failed him. That dull man drove 4 hours in a snowstorm because I called him crying and didn't even know why. The exciting men I knew before him are mostly dead or divorced, or boring everyone in a bar somewhere about who they used to be. Hal was the most alive person I ever met. He was just quiet about it. She looked at me hard. Your woman didn't leave because you were boring. She left because she couldn't sit still long enough to be loved properly. And that's a thing about her, not you. You dodged a whole bad life and she handed you a stone to carry for it. Put it down. I looked at her hand on the table. It's not that simple, I said. No, she said, it never is. But you can decide whose voice you let be the last one. Her hand didn't move. She's had a year and a half. That's long enough. I don't know what I'd have done. The rain was loud and the lamp was low. And her hand was right there, and mine was halfway across the table without my telling it to go. And the air had got that thickness to it, the dangerous thickness, the one I'd felt over the dock the day of the marking gauge, only there'd been daylight then, and a board between us and somewhere safe to look. There was nowhere safe to look now. Then headlights swung across the kitchen wall. We both sat back like the table had got hot. A car was in the drive, fishtailing on the running gravel, somebody who had no business on that road in that weather. A door slammed. And then a voice I'd have known anywhere, carrying right through the storm, hollering my name. Dana. Of course it was Dana. I'd told her the lake house, the town, in one of those calls. She'd driven 2.5 hours through a storm warning because she'd had another bad night with another Trevor, and going somewhere dramatic was the only way she knew to feel a feeling. She came through the door dripping and wild-eyed with a duffel bag, full of apology and not sorry at all, and stopped dead in the candlelit kitchen looking at the two of us at the table, the lamp, the soup, the closeness still hanging in the room thick enough that even Dana could feel it. "Oh," she said. Nobody said anything for a second. Helen stood, smooth as anything, and put out her hand. "You'll be Dana, there's soup. You drove through that, you've earned it. Sit down before you catch your death." And that was how my sister ended up at the table too, and the dangerous hour folded itself away. And I sat there with the two of them and watched something I hadn't planned to watch. Because Dana, once she was warm and fed and had her shoes off, did what Dana does. She told us about Trevor, the whole opera of it. The text he'd sent, the thing he'd said in front of his friends, the way she'd thrown a glass, an actual restaurant, and how everyone had looked. She told it well. She tells everything well. It was loud and funny and sad, and it went on, and she watched our faces the whole time to see it land, the way she always has since she was small, since before either of us knew why. And Helen listened, kindly. She asked the right questions. But I watched her watch my sister, and I saw her see it, the same thing she'd named in the boathouse weeks back without ever having met the girl. Some people need an audience to feel a thing. They mistake the noise for the feeling. "And what about you two?" Dana said finally, and her eyes had been going between us the whole time. "You've been out here all summer, just the two of you." She said it with a little smile, the digging kind. "Ellie never tells me anything. Is there something to tell?" The room held still. "Your brother," Helen said, "is rebuilding a dock that will outlast everyone in this room. He does it the way it should be done, which is slowly, and without telling anyone how hard it is. There's nothing to tell because the man doesn't tell. That's not a flaw, whatever you've decided about it." She said it lightly, but there was iron under the light. "You might learn something. Watching him, I have." Dana blinked. She wasn't used to being answered like that. She laughed it off, made a joke, moved on, the way she does. But I saw it go in, just for a second, before she covered it. My loud sister looked at her quiet brother across a stranger's candlelit table and didn't have anything funny to say. And I sat there, and I finally understood the thing I'd been getting wrong my whole life. I'd spent a year and a half thinking Dana had it, and I didn't. That her life was full and mine was empty. All that love, all that drama, all that feeling. And here she was, soaked and shaking, 2.5 hours in a thrown glass from the last man who was going to leave her, and across the table was Helen, who'd had 31 quiet years with a man who came home every night, and you only had to look at the two of them to see which one had actually been loved. Dana had an audience. Helen had a marriage. Those aren't the same thing. They were never the same thing. I'd just been told they were by a woman in a kitchen who needed me to be the small one so she could feel like the big one, and I'd believed her for 18 months. The noise isn't the feeling. The noise is what you make when you can't find the feeling. I knew sitting there exactly what I wanted. I wanted the quiet kind. I wanted what Helen had had and lost and was sitting across from me, half offering to risk again. I wanted to be the dull man who drives through the snowstorm. I'd been him the whole time and called it a defect. But knowing what you want and reaching for it are two different distances, and the second one is a great deal longer when the woman is 53 and you're 37 and her husband taught you everything you know and his tool is sitting in your truck in the rain. There were 100 reasons it was a foolish thing to want. The years between us, what people would say, what I'd be to her, and what she'd worry she was to me. All of it real. None of it the kind of thing that makes the wanting stop. The storm blew through by morning. Dana slept on the couch and snored like a man twice her size. I took the guest room and lay awake most of the night listening to the rain ease off. Knowing Helen was awake too on the other side of the wall, both of us turning the same thing over in the dark, and neither of us willing to be the one who said it. In the morning the lake was glass, the road had drained. Dana hugged me too long in the drive and whispered, "She's good, Eli. She's really good. Don't be an idiot about it," which from Dana is practically scripture, and then she drove off toward whatever came next for her. Helen and I stood on the porch with coffee and didn't talk about the night. We talked about the dock. It had held every board just like I'd said. There was one rail left to set and then the job was done. One rail. I'd been dragging that summer out a board at a time. I knew it now. The way you slow your steps walking somewhere you don't want to arrive. Because the job was the only reason I had to be there. When the last rail went on, there'd be no rotten dock left to fix, no excuse left to drive out, nothing between me and the long quiet drive home for good. And neither of us had said the one true thing, and the work was about to run out, and you can't lash a tarp over that. The storm I'd been afraid of had already passed through the kitchen the night before, and the one I should have been afraid of was the morning the last nail went in, and I had to decide whether I was a man who finishes the dock and drives away, or a man who finally, once in his life, says the thing out loud while there's still a board left to stand on. The last rail went on at 10:30 on a Thursday morning in August. I said it the way Hal taught me, which is to say slow, checking the line twice, sinking the screws by hand for the last quarter turn so the wood wouldn't split. I'd been not finishing that rail for 3 days. I'd find another board to sand. I'd decide a joint wanted one more coat. Helen never said a word about it, but she knew. She'd bring coffee out to the dock and watch me invent reasons, and the watching had a question in it that I kept pretending I couldn't hear. But there's only so long a man can pretend a finished thing is unfinished. The rail went on. I ran my hand down it, and it was true, and it was done, and there was nothing left. I stood up on the new dock and looked at it, the whole length of it. Tight boards, square corners, the boathouse behind me, with its new wall and its old smell. It would outlast me. It would be holding people up at this lake long after anybody remembered the man who built it. I'd done a clean job, the cleanest of my life maybe, because I'd had a reason to make every board count, and the reason was standing up at the house in the kitchen window, watching me find out I was out of road. I packed my tools. I'm telling you that part because it's true and because it's the part I'm not proud of. I loaded the truck. I coiled my cords and wrapped my levels and set my saw in its case, and I told myself the story a man tells himself, which was that I'd do this clean too. I'd shake her hand. I'd thank her for the work. I'd say the dock was the best I had in me, which was the truth, and I'd let her think that was all of it. And I'd drive home and let the 18-month stone settle back into my coat pocket where it had always lived, and I'd be the safe man who finishes the dock and drives away. I got as far as the truck door. Helen had come down off the porch. She had Hal's marking gauge in her hand, the brass and rosewood one. I'd left it on the workbench in the boathouse, on purpose maybe, I don't know, and she'd gone and got it, and now she was holding it out to me across the gravel. "You forgot this," she said. I looked at it. The worn brass head. The rosewood gone dark with 30 years of his hands, and the little nick out of the fence on the right side, where Hal had dropped it off a scaffold in 1990-something and refused to replace the tool over a scratch. Because a scratch doesn't change the line, he'd say. Only a fool throws out a good tool for a scratch. "It's yours," she said. "He'd have wanted you to have it. I should have given it to you the first week. I think I held on to it so you'd have to keep coming back for it." That stopped me with my hand on the truck door. She'd said it plain, not as a confession exactly. As a fact, she'd decided to stop hiding. And it landed in me harder than any of the careful things we'd said all summer, because it was the first time either of us had admitted out loud that the coming back had been the point. I took the gauge. The wood was warm from her hand, and I stood there holding the one solid thing Hal had left in the world, being the tool he'd used to mark every true line he ever cut, and I understood that if I got in that truck I'd be doing the one thing he never did. I'd be skipping the corner. I'd be living unfinished and calling it done because finishing it was hard. "Helen," I said. "Don't," she said. "If you're about to thank me, don't. I've had men thank me. I buried the last one who never had to." I set the gauge on the hood of the truck. I needed both hands empty for this, and I didn't know why. I had a whole speech, I said. Drove out here 3 days running with it. About how the dock came out good and how I appreciated the work, and how if she ever needed anything fixed she had my number. I know the speech. She wasn't smiling. Hal had it too, the polite one. The one men give instead of the true one because the true one might cost something. This is going to cost something. Everything worth saying does. So I said it. Standing in her gravel drive with my tools loaded and my truck pointed at the road, and every reason in the world to keep my mouth shut, I finally said the thing I'd been carrying since the storm, since before the storm, since a morning in June when a woman on a porch told me to take my time. "I don't want to go home," I said. "I've been making up reasons to stay for a month, and I'm out of dock to fix. There's nothing left to do here, and I can't stand the idea of driving off this property and going back to being the man who measures other people's lumber and goes home to a quiet house and calls it a life." My voice was steady. I made it stay steady. "You said in the kitchen you didn't want to make the same mistake twice." "The waiting one. Neither do I. I've been waiting 18 months to find out I'm not the thing she said I was, and I found out this summer, and you're the one who told me. I don't want to drive away from the person who told me." The lake was flat behind her. A breeze came up off it and moved the loose hair at her temple, and she didn't move to fix it. "You're 37, she said, quiet and not unkind, testing the weight of it the way she tested a rotten board. "I know how old I am. I'm 53. When you're my age, I'll be in my 70s. You understand what you're standing in your own way to say." "I understand it better than you think." I took a step toward her, not far. "I've been hearing the reasons in my head for a month, the years, what people will say, that I'll wake up one day and feel cheated, or you will. I've turned over every one of them, the way you turn over a board before you trust it. And here's what I came up with." I made myself look right at her. "Hal got 31 years and you'd both have called it short. My whole summer I've watched my sister chase men her own age through one fire after another and come out singed every time, looking for a feeling she can't find because she keeps mistaking the noise for it. And then there's you, who had the real thing and knows exactly what it weighs. And would I rather have however many years I get with somebody who knows what it weighs, or 40 more being right about being dull?" I shook my head. "I'd take the real thing short over the safe thing forever. You taught me that. In your own kitchen, by lamplight the night of the storm. You can't take it back now." She was very still. "I'm not offering you a man who's going to fix things," I said. "You've got a fixed dock. I'm offering you the dull one. The one who comes home every night. The one his own ex called paint drying. I'm told by a woman whose judgment I'd trust over my own that the dull ones are the only ones worth a damn, and I'd like the chance to prove her right." For a long moment she didn't say anything at all. The water moved. A jay went off somewhere in the pines. And I stood there with my heart going, and my tools loaded, and waited to find out whether I'd just talked myself out of the one good thing I'd found, the way I'd talked myself into being small for a year and a half. Then Helen looked at the gauge on the hood of my truck, Hal's gauge. And she looked back at me and her eyes were wet, but her voice when it came was as level as it had been all summer. "You'd better unload the truck," she said. That was it. That was the whole of it. No speech back. She wasn't a woman who made speeches any more than I was a man who finished early. She just looked at me with the water shining in her eyes and told me to unload the truck, and it was the most anyone had ever offered me in my life. I crossed the gravel, and I put my arms around her, and she put her face against my shoulder. Two careful people who'd run clean out of reasons to be careful. She smelled like the kitchen and the lake. She held on harder than a woman who's sure of anything holds, and I understood she'd been as scared as I was the whole time, scared in the quiet way, which is the way that costs the most. We hadn't said 100 words between us. We'd said the only ones that mattered. "Hal would laugh at us," she said into my shoulder. "Took us all summer. He took his time with everything," I said. "I learned it from him." I felt her laugh more than heard it. Then she pulled back and looked at me and put her hand flat on my chest, the way she'd put it flat on the table that night, an offer with the weight in it now. "Unload the truck, Eli," she said again, "and then come inside. The house is too quiet." So I did. By the following spring, the dock had weathered to the soft gray of a thing that belongs where it stands. I built a boat over the winter in Hal's shop with Hal's tools, the gauge marking every line. A 16-foot lapstrake rowing skiff, cedar on oak, the kind he taught me first because he said if you can build that you can build anything, and if you can't you've no business with the fancy stuff. I built it slow. I built it right. And when the ice went off the lake in April, Helen and I carried it down the new dock between us, one of us at each end, and set it in the water, and it floated true, the way a thing floats when somebody who loved you taught somebody who loves you how to make it. We named her the Helen. She didn't want me to. She said it was sentimental. I told her I was a sentimental man underneath the dull, and that she'd known that when she told me to unload the truck, and she couldn't argue with that, so she let me paint the name on the transom in Hal's old paint. Most mornings now I'm up before her. I make the coffee and I take a cup down to the end of the dock I built, and I sit there while the lake does what the lake does in the early light, goes from nickel to silver to gold. The skiff knocks soft against the new pilings. Some mornings the heron comes back, the same one I'd bet, and stands on the far post like he's checking my corners. And after a while I hear the screen door, and Helen comes down the dock with her own cup and sits beside me. And we don't say much. We don't have to. We said the part that needed saying in a gravel drive in August, and everything since has been the long, quiet payoff of it. People still don't understand us. Her sister doesn't. The town doesn't, quite. They look at the 16 years and they do the math, and they decide one of us must be getting something out of it that isn't love, because that's the only way the math works for people who've never had the real thing and don't know what it weighs. Let them. My own sister was the first one to get it. Dana drove out last fall and sat on this dock and watched Helen and me not talk for an hour, the way she used to need to fill every silence she'd ever been in, and at the end of it she said, "Quiet for once." I've never had this, not once. And I told her she would, if she ever stopped chasing the loud kind long enough to recognize the quiet kind when it sat down next to her. I don't know if she heard me. I hope she did. There's a thing I know now that I didn't know on a porch last June. For a year and a half I let one woman's worst word be the truest thing about me. Boring, she said, like a sentence, and I served it. I built a small life around being right about being small. And what I found out at this lake, from a widow who'd buried the most alive, quiet man either of us ever knew, is that peace is not the same as boring. They look alike from a distance, to people moving too fast to tell them apart. But boring is when nothing is happening and you're waiting for your life to start. Peace is when everything that matters is already here, and you finally got still enough to feel it. A loud life and a full one were never the same thing. I had them confused for 36 years. It took a 53-year-old woman and a rotten dock to teach me the difference, and I'd do the whole grieving summer over again to learn it. The dangerous part, the part nobody warns you about, is that once somebody truly sees the quiet in you and calls it worth instead of dullness, you can't go back to hiding in it. You're known. That's the grace and that's the risk, both at once. Helen saw the man under the word, and now I have to be him every day, the man who comes home every night, and it's the only thing I've ever been afraid of that I'm glad I didn't run from. The coffee's gone cold in my hand telling you this. It does that. The skiff's still knocking against the dock. She'll be down in a minute. So let me ask you something, the way she once asked me without asking. Have you ever let one person's word about you become the only word, and carried it so long you forgot you were allowed to set it down? Have you ever almost driven away from the person who finally saw you clearly, because being seen felt more dangerous than being alone? Have you ever experienced something similar? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.